I wonder, like, what can we do that's funny or interesting? I don't know. We're not funny or interesting, are we?
Oh, we are neither of those things.
All right.
Yeah, boy!
Smile.
Okay, here we go. You ready? Silence!
Welcome back to Exit 181, the podcast where I, Matt Duncan, and my good friend.
Sorry.
Well, just cut it there and just come in.
Well, yeah. Well, because normally there's like a big pause before I say my name, and so I was like, I'm not going to pause this time.
Well, then I said extra stuff to fill that pause. And
I'm Dean Bianchi.
And I'm Matt Duncan. And today on Exit 181, we're going to talk about a band that changed the way people listened to music in the 70s and the 80s. Queen.
And most people have not heard of this band. So we're gonna
they're relatively unknown.
Unlike last week's episode where everybody knew everything we were talking about, including us.
Exactly. Yeah. So the reason that I recommended that we talk about Queen this week is that Dean had mentioned them in his pedigree playlist on Spotify in our sort of pilot episodes. So if you have not checked those out, or even if you had, you might want to revisit them on Spotify. You can hear episode 0A and 0B, where we talk about sort of how we got to our musical taste and where we're at. If you like YouTube more than Spotify, you could go there and listen to our episodes that are audio only, but we do have like a thumbnail and that kind of thing. But there are also our first several episodes with video and clips and snippets in there. We're slowly but surely migrating things back to Spotify. We'll see what happens with the platform over the remainder of the year.
We may be migrating away from Spotify.
Yeah, we might. We'll see what happens. You know, it's always like a roller coaster doing a podcast where we don't want to pay anybody for music, but we do want you to hear clips. So, I'm brought up Queen because I think, we both have something that resonates in the history of our music listening with Queen. Queen's a really incredibly influential band. They are kind of sometimes hard to put into a genre.
Yeah.
And intentionally so. I just watched the Bohemian Rhapsody film, and there's a lot of interesting things in that film. I didn't really know what I should expect, and it was kind of exactly what I expected, and some things I didn't. So we'll talk about those kind of things. Queen has interestingly been still relevant for a while. I occasionally will see stuff that the members of Queen are working on. They've continued performing, most recently, as far as I know, with Adam Lambert from
is that American Idol or
American Idol? Yes, that's right.
Idol. Yeah.
So Dean, why don't you take us back to the 70s?
Sure. No. Well, so in thinking about us discussing this, because this was kind of a not spur of the moment, but we really just a couple of days ago kind of thought, hey, this is something to talk about. I realized, a lot of the episodes and the stuff that we've talked about, I've had like a really kind of front facing, strong kind of gung ho, like, some of the bands that we've talked about, particularly like the Sumo Psycho stuff and the Kim Dracula and all that stuff. I was thinking about it earlier today that Queen has been in this thread of things through my past that I've never acknowledged, I guess, not like to myself, I've never really thought about it, but so probably the starting point and what is the reference back to those original episodes is I think I had kind of laid out the story that back then a little bit, but in simple terms, like one of the things that fascinated me about music as a kid was the use of stereo and
Great.
how that came out in recordings, particularly. So I think I also referenced like, so the Doors were a big band for that because they literally like the keyboards are all on one side, you know, like the left track. And then on the right side is the guitar line and stuff.
Right.
And as I was becoming, you know, just exposed to music and liking different bands and starting to kind of find my way, you know, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, Queen was another band that did that a lot. Only it is never first in my head, I guess, which I always thinking about it today. I just found it kind of weird. So I actually went back today because the cassette I remember playing the most by Queen was the album Jazz.
Okay.
And that one, it has Fat Bottom Girls and Bicycle Race and a couple other, you know, it's got quite a number of quote unquote hits. Let Me Entertain You is on there. Don't Stop Me Now. You know, so it's definitely, you know, in that wheelhouse of where they were really kind of getting a lot of radio airplay. But I think it's Bicycle Race is actually the one that stuck out. But all of those songs use a lot of stereo effects. There's parts in Bicycle Race where the lyrics kind of jump back and forth from left to right, and there's sound effects kind of swirling around you and stuff like that. Clearly, like a song like Bohemian Rhapsody, they do a lot with, you know, there's a lot of stereo stuff going on. But then to your point, you know, I think where it doesn't jump out to me, whereas like sitting and listening to a band like the Doors or really any of these classic rock bands, maybe not any, the Beatles certainly have 9,000 genres that they toyed with.
Right.
But but Queen also, like, really, you know, it's a different set of genres that they play with, but it's like you said, clearly they're not locked into any one thing on any one album really at all. Even, I mean, their first album is a lot of sort of, what would be the word for it? It's very boisterous show, not show tunes, but very showy kind of, but in a very 70s style. You know, it makes me think of like Styx or something. Like it's very
right. It's a rock and roll album, you know,
yeah.
And it's interesting. Like it looks like the breakdown of who wrote what on that album. It's about like
on Jazz or on the first one?
On the first Queen album.
Yeah.
On the very first one. Well, like Keep Yourself Alive.
Yeah.
And so Freddie Mercury's listed as writing like half the album, and Brian May maybe the other half. Roger Taylor writes one song. That's it.
Yeah.
And the Roger Taylor song is Modern Times Rock and Roll, which is not even 2 minutes long. and so that's you know, interesting and telling. So one thing before we get too far away from the stuff you were saying about stereo, there is a scene in Bohemian Rhapsody where they address that, like they allude to it, and they're like, well, what if we pan this way and then it moves over to this way and then it ends in the middle? And so, you know, it's a shorthand to try to get basically to what you're talking about with stereo and their experimentation. And the Wikipedia article addresses that in an interesting way. It points out that A Night at the Opera and which is their fourth album, and oh gosh, what's the other one?
News of the World?
Sheer Heart Attack, the one before.
Yeah, sure.
So 74 and 75 is when they're like doing their big sort of experimentation with stereo at first. So mid 70s they're playing with that. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. But I think so. I feel like I don't know. So, you know, I didn't do a ton of deep diving research or anything, but I think it's pretty compelling and also telling, I guess, of the nature of the band that, you know, you had a lot of acts in the 70s. So some, you know, I think there was playing with stereo was a thing that people did because you weren't that far removed from just things were mono, you know, and it was, you had a producer who might come in and go like, let's do this or that. And there was, you know, some of these things, again, like the Doors is an example, because I don't think Queen goes full boat. Like, there's just stuff here and nothing in between. Like that feels very purposeful from a producer kind of standpoint. Like they're really just trying to maximize this technology of stereo kind of thing. Whereas I think Queen leveraged it in that again, and there's got to be a word for like, even like the fact that an album is called Night at the Opera, like there's a performance quality baked into everything from the songs, the lyrics, the way it's produced, all that stuff. It is very theatrical, robust, whatever in nature, all the way down to the production, to every little tidbit.
The film addresses that actually, because that's the, when they bring a Night at the Opera to the guy, the exec, the label guy, he's like, they're talking about what should be the single, and he's like, you shouldn't even put Bohemian Rhapsody on the album at all. It definitely shouldn't be your first single. And there's a song about, what is it called? I Love My Car or something. Like, it's got some, let's see. I'm in love with my car. It's another Roger Taylor song, the one and only Roger Taylor song. That's the record exec is like, that's what you need to release. That's what kids can bang their head and as they drive around to that song. That's what you need. And they then say, nope, it's a Night at the Opera. It's all about opera. They talk about Bohemian Rhapsody and how it's poetry, the fact that it's, almost 6 minutes long. And he's like, nope, can't be over 3. What are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. And then at the very end of the film, as they are like killing it at Live Aid and everybody's going nuts, they cut to that same record exec sitting at the exact same desk, like twiddling his thumbs, like, what the hell did I do? I lost them. What's this about? So yeah, I mean that, and then to follow that up after Night at the Opera with Day at the Races is another move. And just how freaking prolific they were. I mean, Jesus, 73, 2 albums, first album in 73, 2 albums in 74, Night at the Opera 75, Day at the Races 76, News of the World 77, Jazz 78. Then they take 2 years off and they release The Game and Flash Gordon, both in 80. And, and they just keep cranking stuff out. They slow down there in the 80s a little bit, but Jesus. Like that's crazy. So, all right. I thought it was interesting. Like what you're alluding to is the way that they're, they are experimental. Some Queen songs are really dumb. Like the lyrics are stupid, and it just like, I'm in love with my car, but some of that is that because they're all writing them. They're just, coming together and putting out tunes. But even some of Freddie Mercury's songs are a little goofy here and there. Yeah. Bohemian Rhapsody in the film, he's attributed as saying that it's poetry of a certain type. It's like prose poetry. It's, it's up to the person listening to get what it's about. It's, there's an affectation and a pretension to it, but it makes the song amazing and crazy. And like, if you think about it too hard, you're going to miss the point of everything happening there.
Well, I wonder if some of that is kind of like you're saying they were very prolific. Like they were just writing and making songs, and they can't all be, I mean, you could even make the same argument about the Beatles with the amount of songs that they have. There are some goofy stuff in there, but also the time period maybe allowed for that a little bit. Like they were big enough at that point that it didn't matter, and they were just spitting all this stuff out. But then I think there is, going back to that sort of theatrical component, like musicals. I'm not a fan of musicals by any stretch, and I know some people love them to death, but part of what I don't like about musicals is they seem like silly songs to me.
Sure.
But I think if you apply that to where Queen is living, that space they're living in, there's going to be those silly songs where it's just telling some goofy story of whatever, and it's not necessarily like, I think it's a good choice of words, experimental, but they're not. I know a lot of the stuff that we connect on musically throughout all these conversations, you could throw experimental in
sure.
the context, but those people, it's very purposeful experimental,
Right.
and it's experimental a lot of times in fighting against the norm, being, you know what I mean? Like kind of pushing boundaries and being experimental for experimental's sake. I don't get that from Queen, that they were like necessarily,
Well, yeah.
hey,
like,
this is a pop song and we're going to do it different because we're trying to,
Yeah,
you know
no,
what I mean? Like
I-
there's not a pretension of like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely get that. I think some of it. Okay, number one, they seem like they're musicians first and foremost. Like,
Yeah.
we're musicians. Everybody's got their talents, their abilities, their whatever they bring to the mix is legit from a musical standpoint, and they did smart stuff, I think, in a time when they could play with albums, like the idea of an album and what it meant to release an album. It has an A side, it has a B side, it's got a gatefold, it's got, photography and graphic design and all these things. Like that was sort of becoming a bigger thing because it wasn't just sort of a generic package that the label put out. They got to have some say. They hired graphic designers. There are companies that are specializing in that. And so they didn't rest on anything. They didn't stop. They wanted to push themselves in some other ways. They didn't want to get bored, I think.
yeah,
And I think about sometimes, like, there's a vault at Paisley Park where Prince has tape upon tape upon tape of songs that
Right.
just never ever got released because he was just writing songs all the time. But Prince was his own kind of individual. As much as he had bands work with him, play with him, it was always Prince, right?
Right.
It was his vision. The Bohemian Rhapsody film shows Freddie Mercury saying, and I don't know if this is accurate, but it is the way that he's like, I went and made my solo record and I told them what I wanted to do and everybody said, okay, and did it. And that's why it was terrible.
Yeah.
Because the band Queen was a band and people would get snarky with each other and say no, and this is stupid, or do this differently, or why don't you try this instead? And there was always that tension and that pushback of what made their collaboration work. So at the very least, like Taylor and May and, the surviving members of that band want that to be the message that comes out of this biopic.
Yeah.
That, Freddie came around and understood that they made their best music when they were all working together, right? Yeah. Whether or not that's accurate, whether or not Freddie Mercury actually felt that way, the film says that. And it frames what you're talking about in this interesting way that, Queen wasn't going to stop. When they picked up speed, they didn't just coast. They kept pushing.
Well, and it's interesting too, that whole component of it, the Freddie Mercury component. I mean, him is such a personality, such a dynamic, like a lot of, you could pick out other bands where they wouldn't survive a lead singer like that, or that front man would drive everything. And I think that's some of that pushback that they're trying to play off in the film, and that probably happened in real life. Like there's, you've got like people that are like guitar aficionados and stuff will have a huge respect for Brian May and all that stuff, but the general public wasn't focused on Brian May, or I can't even think of the bass player's name. And, like it was Freddie Mercury was
Deacon.
that was the focus, but yet they were able to work as a band in terms of what was actually coming out, the
Right.
the level of talent across all four of them, even though everybody looking at the band is thinking about Freddie Mercury, like they're just
Right. Right. It's one
versus
of those,
like I was just gonna say versus like a band like Rush, like
yeah.
from a musical standpoint, you've got a similar thing in a way of like these incredibly talented people. But in reality, it's not like Geddy Lee doesn't stand out like a Freddie Mercury does in Rush. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something different there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I think about bands like Tool. Tool reminds me of Queen in some ways. I think they're a little more consistently Tool in the way they get their, music out. I think they have a very different, process, obviously, for how they write, and it takes them forever to put an album out or whatever. When Maynard goes on stage and stands at the back because he considers himself another instrument, that's an interesting thing that, like, in the Bohemian Rhapsody film, they show this press conference where somebody calls some journalist calls Freddie Mercury the leader of Queen. And he says, "I'm not the leader. I'm just one member. There are four of us on the stage here."
Yeah.
And so there's some of that. Now the big difference is, though, that Freddie Mercury leaned hard into that frontman thing because that was his shtick. Those other guys were like, doofy looking long haired guys, and he was something else,
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so like, yeah, there's these things about Queen that set them apart at the time. Well, okay, so let's go to maybe another way to look at it, like Led Zeppelin, right?
Yeah.
Do you know when Led Zeppelin like put out their first records? Because it seems like they predate Queen a little bit.
68, 69.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to bring them up in the context of the end of Led Zeppelin, but go ahead with where you're going.
So yeah, let's see. Where's the discography for Zeppelin? Okay, yeah. The first two Zeppelin albums are 69. 3 is 1970. The Untitled, often called 4, is 71. Houses of the Holy, 73. Physical Graffiti, 75. Presence is 76. And In Through the Outdoors, 79. Okay, so Zeppelin is waning. Like, they're in their last couple of albums as Queen is like picking up speed.
Right.
But for all of the, sort of Jimmy Page is, this guitar sort of god who's doing weird things like with, violin bows and whatever. Zeppelin sounds like Zeppelin in my mind. There's an arc, but they're never like all over the place the way Queen can be. I mean, Queen will be all over the place in the same song sometimes.
Right. Well, and that's what I was thinking. If you look at where I was going to go with it with the Zeppelin thing, because actually, if you throw in, I mean, there's the album Coda, which I think came out in 80, but that's post. I think it was pulled from recordings, but John Bonham had passed away or whatever.
Okay.
But so where I was going with it was you have that sort of late 70s to 80 Zeppelin thing, which is still just blues rock based.
Right.
Zeppelin. And then Queen's, you've got The Game comes out. You've got Another One Bites the Dust. You've got they start bringing in little bits of disco, and like for as much as they were all over the place in their own space, they also were very aware of what was going on. They pulled from what was going on in pop culture or popular music at that time, and then you got Under Pressure, and you got like those early 80s songs of Queen are indicative of 80s songs. They're not
Right.
a band, a classic rock band, Queen playing still in the 80s. They're a different sound to some degree, you know, whereas Zeppelin, late 70s Zeppelin is not, it's not reflective of the late 70s music that's out there. It's Zeppelin making another album.
Right.
And that's fine, but it's, you know, it's a very different.
Well, and so that's interesting. Okay. When I think about stuff like that, like what you just described, I immediately think of Madonna. And because, you know, Madonna has reinvented herself pretty consistently over 4 decades.
Right.
You know, and arguably 5, maybe, you know, but because she's in tune to what's going on, she's, you know, taken on this kind of level of a certain type of performer, a certain type of presence in the music world. She's a performer, you know, like she's not just a singer. She's not just a dancer. There's a whole other sort of package there. I mean, Lady Gaga kind of has a similar thing. She just hasn't been around as long.
Well, and there's something to that I think Madonna's a good example and Queen's a good example, that there's a risk there, I think, of doing that. And those are both successful. What that makes me think of is like, so I instantly think of Kiss.
Yeah.
And Kiss went through their disco phase because they were trying to, and I like this song, I Was Made for Loving You.
For loving you, baby.
But they weren't, they quickly realized, we're Kiss. Let's just go back to rock and roll songs. Like that's you know, they weren't turning into, I mean, maybe a little bit because there was hair metal and they could fit in and some of the Lick It Up and some of those songs are really hair metal songs, but that's not that far removed from what Kiss was doing.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Totally.
Whereas, you know, I think Queen, like, you know, even like then you get past the Flash Gordon stuff and then was it Hot Space and some of those, I mean, those songs are pretty drastically different. They're still clearly Queen and they don't sound like, hey, here's this band trying to fit in. You know, that's what I mean. Like Madonna the same way, like you don't instantly go, oh, it just sounds like Madonna trying to sound like whatever's modern. Like it actually works.
Right.
But it's risky. I think a lot of bands can't.
That's one of those things.
If they wanted to.
Yeah.
I mean, Skinny Puppy's not going to try to sound different than Skinny Puppy.
Yeah, they're not going to put
no
out
matter
a
what
folk
decade
album.
it was. You know?
Yeah. There's not going to be, and that's, well, and you think about bands in that sort of vein too, like Ministry sort of lost their way for a little bit, I think. You know, they were just cranking out like these speed metal, industrial metal things. They were, and it's just like, we got the rocket, now we gotta, you know, reinvent this. And no, they just, it was bad there for a while. They kind of recaught it. They, you know, took a step back, changed the way they did things. Queen is interesting. I think I wonder sometimes if the fact that those guys were something else first, not just musicians. Like Brian May is an astrophysicist. You know, like there's all of that other stuff that those guys had, you know, sort of in their lives, in their back pockets. You know, there's this other set of interests. And along the lines of what you're saying, it also seems like they kept listening to music and not just the music they liked from before, but like they were listening to the music of the day. They maybe even, I'm not sure, but it seemed like they toured enough that they were in a community of musicians, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, I don't know what was happening with Zeppelin, but it seemed like those guys they started with the blues and turned it into rock and never really left that arena as that band. It's obvious that Plant was into other stuff and did other things. I've never listened to any of Jimmy Page's later solo things or any of that.
Well, there was they did. So outside of Zeppelin, you could make an argument that they did do that. Like that, there's an album, The Firm. I don't know if you remember The Firm from the 80s. Like that's Jimmy Page with, I think, the singer from Bad Company and some other.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And that's an 80s. That's got a very 80s feel, that Radioactive, that song. It's like,
yeah.
Okay.
So, I didn't realize that.
And then
I didn't realize that was
like
Jimmy Page. Okay.
Yeah. And then I know like Robert Plant's solo stuff in the late 80s, early 90s was interesting for that time, like that Tall Cool One and some of those songs that were like,
right. Well, and he did Honey Drippers too, he obviously yeah. But that was again a little retro-y, right?
Yeah. And he's now in that space with, is it Alison Krauss, and it's got a very like folky country.
Yeah.
But to the point, Led Zeppelin didn't grow with the time.
Right.
Led Zeppelin was Led Zeppelin from, I don't know where to jump to next.
Well, okay. So let's, all right. So one of the things you just mentioned, Flash Gordon, a minute ago. And so I don't think we talked about Flash Gordon when we did our movie episode. I don't know if we, and we didn't talk about Highlander either. But there's, this band was hired to do all the songs for these two movies, and what a weird thing. Like what? Huh? like, and the fact that like the Flash Gordon song is about Flash Gordon, like that.
I actually really enjoy that song too. Like I always
Flash's
like that
theme,
song.
like he'll save every one of us. Yeah. It's so weird. And like I'm looking at the track list, and Brian May wrote Flash's theme, and Roger Taylor wrote In the Space Capsule, the love theme, and Freddie Mercury wrote Ming's theme. And then he also wrote The Hypnotic Seduction of Dale and Football Fight. And then Roger Taylor wrote Love Theme Reprise in the Death Cell. John Deacon wrote Execution of Flash. And then Freddie and Howard Blake, who did the film score, did the Kiss Aura Resurrection. Like, huh? Right. There's just so many weird things. But this is a Queen album. It's not just like somebody wrote a bunch of songs and said, hey, Queen, perform these. They got the script, apparently, and they scored a film with Queen music instead of like instrumentally or anything else. And that's neat and weird. Just so odd. Like, I don't really know what to do with it entirely. It's just so strange.
Well, it was a different time. It was the 80s.
Absolutely.
Well,
it was 1980, right?
Yeah.
And, I get frustrated with people these days who complain about how come everything's a remake? Why is it blah, blah, blah? All that kind of... It's been that way since they started making movies. Like, since, like, the 19 teens and 20s. Like, how many different versions of, the first half a dozen movies that were made were, like, remakes of the first half a dozen movies that were made. And, it's not like they were original scripts all the time. Like, Thomas Edison films Frankenstein, that's a 100-year-old book at that point.
Right.
So the fact that like the Flash Gordon movie is this retro kind of thing right after, Buck Rogers has been on TV and, there's just all of this stuff. And Star Wars is Flash Gordon with Nazis and samurai and cowboys. I mean, it's, that's kind of the mashup that Lucas was going for, So, yeah, it was a weird time. 1980 was just odd, but there was this retro kind of thing happening. And it's just, I think it's neat that they just said, hey, Queen, score this movie.
Yeah.
What a strange thing to happen. And then 6 years later, a kind of magic, like not all of it, but a lot of it is Highlander. Like the
I'm gonna be
soundtrack.
honest, I've never seen Highlander.
Dude, really? You also haven't seen Big Trouble in Little China, right?
I probably saw. Nah, I don't
Probably
know
seen
if
pieces
I've
of it,
actually
yeah.
seen it all. Yeah,
But so okay, Highlander.
I got a lot of movie gaps. I
Yeah.
know. I mean, I know from the Zeitgeist Highlander, but
Highlander. Okay, so I'll just say this: when we were in college, the sequel to Highlander came out.
yeah,
And it was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened. And in Highlander, there's this line that is repeated over and over and over in the film. There can be only one. And they should have just taken that to heart.
yeah.
And only let there be one. Now, the TV show seems to have, run with it in some interesting ways. But now I've heard, too, that Henry Cavill might be in a reboot of Highlander, which, hey, that might be neat. Whatever. Sounds cool. But Highlander
I don't know why. I don't know how I missed seeing that. I'm sure it was on cable 1,000. I've seen Krull. I don't know why I've seen that one, but I never saw Highlander.
Yeah, if you had to pick between the two, definitely Highlander. Now, I thought Highlander was the coolest damn thing in the world when I was 14.
Yeah.
It was, or whatever. Like, I guess it came out when I was 14. I saw it on HBO probably when I was about 15, like right after it hit the theater, or after it hit cable. I watched it at my grandfather's house. We watched it like on a Saturday night over the summer. My aunt was visiting with her two little kids. My other little tiny cousin is staying over with us. We're waiting for my uncle to come pick him up. My grandfather is having trouble hearing the dialogue, so we've cranked the volume. So every time anything dramatic happens, Freddie Mercury is just blasting at 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night on a Saturday, in the middle of Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
Just, it's like massive Queen, bah! And then, mumbly dialogue. It was just, I can see very clearly many of the moments from that watching experience, and it made it even better. It was just like, holy shit, this movie is great. But it was just like so weird that it was all Queen songs running throughout the film. And I love the film Highlander, but to say that it is a good film is perhaps overly generous.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, weird, cool, fun mess of a film. But, that's okay. It's got Sean Connery in it, and he's an actual Scotsman, but he's playing an Egyptian who reinvented himself as a Spaniard over a lifetime that spans hundreds of years. And then it has, what's his name? Christopher... Oh my God, what is his name? He's Belgian. The guy who plays the main character, the Highlander, who's supposed to be, Scottish.
I can picture him, but I don't know what his name is. Yeah.
Christopher Lambert. That's his name.
Okay.
So he's Belgian. He has a Belgian accent. He does not sound Scottish at all. And he's playing a Scotsman carrying around a katana, a Japanese samurai sword. Like, there's just a bunch of like comic booky craziness in that film, and it has a Queen soundtrack. And the weirdest part of that then is that, unlike Flash Gordon, Queen doesn't release an album called Highlander.
Right.
They release a Kind of Magic, which interestingly has not only songs from Highlander, but other tunes on it. And it's just so weird and crazy. It's the first Queen album I ever really listened to, start to finish, grabbed it from the library kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is strange. It was weird because it wasn't like Another One Bites the Dust or We Are the Champions or any of the rest of that stuff that was popular. So, yeah, I just didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
It's a neat album. There's a lot of cool stuff. One Vision's a great song. I really love that song, honestly. It's a song that I don't hardly hear anybody ever mention, but I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just looking to, Who Wants to Live Forever? I'm assuming that is one of the Highlander ones.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Now, what year was, I'm jumping around, was Live Aid 82?
No, it was 85.
5?
85, pretty sure. Yeah.
Did you watch it?
I saw parts of it. My musical awareness and taste at the time was not well developed. Like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing in a lot of ways. Like, I was just starting to get interested. I was a big Prince fan at the time.
Okay.
But I knew the names of a lot of those bands, but it was hard for me sometimes because, these bands would get on stage and they'd play a bunch of songs I didn't know. And then they'd play one thing I knew. And I was like, it was hard for me to keep my interest.
Yeah. Well, most of the Live Aid sets, from what I remember, I mean, they were all 4 songs, 5 songs.
Yeah. 20 minutes. That's it. Right.
Now I'm just trying to remember back, like, because I sat and watched all of it.
Okay.
And I don't even remember how I knew about it. I mean, I guess MTV.
Well, it was on TV. It was huge.
But I remember getting up because I remember watching Ultravox.
Oh wow!
And
that's cool.
What's the Bob Geldof? What band was it?
Boomtown Rats.
Boomtown Rats, I think, were on there, and like.
Well, yeah, because it's his thing, right? He's the.
But I remember, and I knew that what was it? Phil Collins was flying from London to. Like, I was kind of fascinated with the whole, like, half this thing is going on in 2 different countries and all that kind of. But obviously the Queen one is one of the most well known from that. I don't actually remember at the time. I'm sure I watched it, but it didn't jump out to me in the same way. But I was 15 at that point. Like, so I don't.
Yeah,
remember.
I was probably 13.
Yeah, because I remember having the same feeling watching the Us Festival on TV.
Yeah,
because I was into a lot of it because it was like Motley Crue and it was more of a.
Yeah. Well, and I remember Farm Aid being on TV, around the same time, and I really didn't know a bunch of those, bunch of that music, like the country music stuff. I didn't know enough of it. It was at a time where like top 40 in a very narrow range was stuff that I was, even willing to give a chance. Just because I didn't have a very well developed sort of sophistication to, my understanding of music.
Right.
And I remember, so that I would have been like in the 7th grade. And I remember in the 6th grade thinking that Van Halen and Quiet Riot and Def Leppard was just a bunch of noise. I don't want to listen to any of that crap. But I loved Prince and I liked Cyndi Lauper, and I started listening to that Heart album where they kind of made their hair metal one. Yeah. Yeah. Well, their hair metal like 4, it's kind of where they went, Yeah. And so Queen, all of these sort of 70s and early 80s, mid 80s rock bands, I wasn't buying albums. I didn't know, and an album would come out and there'd be like 2 singles on it, and you'd never hear any of the rest of the songs unless you had the album. And I was not old enough to really have disposable income, and my family was listening to AM radio where it was like oldies all the time. My mom's record collection is Engelbert Humperdinck and Helen Reddy and, Barry Manilow and Anne Murray. And, it's not any of this kind of stuff. So the library opened up a whole new world for me, because then I could get all these albums out and be like, oh, I've never even heard this song before. Oh, I would never have guessed that was them. And that's what happened with A Kind of Magic, I got that out and I was like, I've heard, half, three quarters of these things in Highlander, but I've never heard them on the radio. I've never heard them anywhere else. So then that prompted me, though, to get Queen's Greatest Hits. And apparently that album holds has a bunch of records as far as sales. And I don't know. So it was released the end of October of 81, and it included like Flash. Some countries' versions of it had Under Pressure on it. And it's their best-selling album. 25 million copies sold. One of the best-selling albums of all time.
Yeah.
And it went number one on the UK album chart. Spent 4 weeks there. And in the 80s, it was the fourth biggest selling album of the decade. And Under Pressure was released as a single the same week the Greatest Hits album came out. So, that's kind of amazing. And wow, new stat. As of this month in 2024, the Greatest Hits album has spent 1,089 weeks on the UK albums chart. And it's 23 times platinum. That's insane. 7 million copies sold. Best-selling album of all time in the UK. Wow. And one of the longest charting albums in the US. 582 weeks on the Billboard 200. 9 times platinum in the US. 15 times platinum in Australia. 10 times platinum in New Zealand. 3 times platinum in Canada. And it re-entered the charts after Bohemian Rhapsody came out.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I'm just looking at that. So I just have like on Spotify, I just pulled up there's this platinum collection, which is the Greatest Hits 1, 2, and 3. Like there's 3 different albums all stuck together. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, again, a Greatest Hits album, you expect to be basically chock full of hits, but even most Greatest Hits albums that are 11 tracks and one of them is some weird song that they released from an old B-side they recorded that they, that's a lot of times what bands were doing. But what's striking me more, not only the breadth of it, like the first disc is 17 songs and then the next one is 17, like again, going back to like that change in the sound. Cause I'm thinking of songs like, well, you got Under Pressure, Radio Gaga, I Want It All. Like those are so not Bohemian Rhapsody and Bicycle Race and Fat Bottom Girls. And,
right.
Those are at the heart, a touch point of 80s music. Another One Bites the Dust. I mean, like those, like they have so many touch point kind of songs, really. Like, and then you have all those, probably partly why you're 97 times platinum and still going strong. You have the whole, you go down a whole road with the Bohemian Rhapsody and the, in the
Wayne's World.
Wayne's World.
Yeah.
And then you have I remember I never heard Stone Cold Crazy until I heard Metallica's cover of it first. And then that,
too.
And there was a big kind of Queen, like the bands that were influenced by Queen that were now bigger in the late 80s and early 90s were bringing up parts of stuff,
Right. That's one of those things about Metallica that I think is kind of interesting when they put out those Garage Days cover, collections and whatever. Some of the places they were gathering their influences before they became Metallica are sort of wacky, like all over the place, like Stone Cold Crazy, but then, Killing Joke, like right next to each other there. And okay, the Misfits, but also, they're just
Diamond Head and Budgie and a bunch of like obscure 70s rock bands that nobody.
Right. But, Stone Cold Crazy is a hell of a song, and it's a hard rockin' metal-y song, and that's the same band that did Bohemian Rhapsody and Somebody to Love and We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. They had that range in them, and they weren't afraid to go all of those places.
Yeah. Well, then those last two songs you just mentioned, I mean, like, talk about anthemic, whatever, to the, you know, like everyone in countries all over the world, that song is like to think about that big of a song. I mean, we are the champions, and the impact on cultures all over the world, like, is kind of crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And so, you know, you get, like, in the 70s, you got this band called Smile that Freddie Mercury joins the band, and they changed the name to Queen. And according to stuff I've looked at, like, Brian May and Roger Taylor were not thrilled to change the name to Queen, but they were like, okay, sure. And it was playing with sort of the fashion of, you know, is this person gay, not gay, androgynous? You've got all the David Bowie Space Oddity kind of stuff, you know, happening all around them. You got punk happening all around them too. You know, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on with identity and gender and transgression in one way or another.
Right.
And so then there's the, you know, are they gay? Like, does Freddie Mercury even know he's gay? Like, in the film, he says to his, you know, girlfriend, best friend, you know, the love of his life, to quote the song, he tells her at one point, I think I may be bisexual. And she says, Freddie, I think you're gay. And like, it's this revelation to him and to, you know, the time period and what's going on. And like, the band in, you know, after his death, the band is like, you know, we didn't really know what was really going on. We just knew a lot was going on with this guy, and hey, it was rock and roll, and it was the 70s and the 80s, and, you know, whatever it is. But I remember being a kid, going to Catholic school, trying to figure out what's going on with, you know, rock stars and everything else, and, you know, is this singer gay or not? It was like a big sort of conversation, because that's what 12-year-olds talk about. And I remember We Are the Champions was the sort of anthem that was associated with an organization for gay rights, and that fit. It made sense. It seemed appropriate in a way that I couldn't, you know, point to or understand exactly why. And once AIDS became a thing that was not, you know, that gay disease, but was like a real presence in the news and in our lives, the song took on such a bigger meaning. Freddie Mercury's death in 91, you know, of AIDS, you know, all of that kind of changed a lot of tone to what, you know, he was doing with his art and what his presence was. I don't know. That's a powerful song, no matter what you want to sort of tie it to, because I don't know. I think that's a frisson song.
Yeah. In
some ways for me, you know, there's just something about the way that the piano and his voice and everything comes together. It's I don't know. It's one of those, it's one of those songs that needs to be on everybody's sort of top 100 list, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's hard.
Well,
You go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, just because that's what I was thinking too. I mean, just like I don't know how many songs you can think of that, you know, are like so cross-cultural too. Like that's where like, like it's one thing to,
that's the right, you know, way like to say it. Yeah.
I'm sure like, so you lived in Japan, and there could be songs in the culture that are super important to the culture, and everyone in all of Japan, no matter what age, knows this song. And nobody over here knows that song. Right. Or nobody in England or Australia knows that song. Like, whereas We Are the Champions, like, I don't know, you know, you probably have to go to some pretty remote spots on the earth to get somebody who doesn't know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't need to speak English, and they don't need, like, the words are massively powerful, but they don't
Yeah, there's
not,
more to that song than just the
Yeah.
words. Right. Absolutely. And Freddie Mercury did write that one. Okay, and so if we go back to sort of where we started and why I thought, hey, let's talk about Queen this time.
Yeah.
So We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You were both on News of the World, and that came out in 77. And in 77, I was 5 years old, about to turn 6. My mother and I are living on our own in a little apartment. She's working a very long commute away, so she's dropping me off at my grandparents' house. I'm going to kindergarten. I just remember every morning the radio station we would listen to in the car as she's like defrosting the car and scraping it, and it's freezing, and at some point I would hear either We Will Rock You or We Are the Champions or both of them, and Dancing Queen and New Kid in Town by the Eagles. And just every single day, those 4 songs, and maybe Muskrat Love by Captain and Tennille. And just all the time, that's just and like, what kind of weird ass programming is that? Too, like the same radio station in 1977, 78 is playing those 5 songs. Okay. Like, I get some of it.
Album, was it AOR, album oriented rock?
No, it was like the pop station, and I guess they were just playing whatever was on the top 40, and all of those things were top 40 songs. So I guess that's
so. This made me think of a side note that I don't know is a thing anymore or ever will be anymore, that may be unique to the 70s and 80s. So We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions. Like the fact that there is something to those songs playing sequentially.
Yeah.
You've got so what jumps to mind is what's the In Excess one that
where the music video is the like Bob Dylan with the cards thing.
But you have to why I gotta look because I feel like an idiot that I can't think of. It's like one of their most popular songs. Seriously. Oh, Need You Tonight goes into that. And then, or you have Zeppelin, I think it's Livin' Lovin' Maid goes into, I'm blanking on that one too. But there's like a few little instances of that. This is a total tangent, but I wonder what caused that.
Well, so it's
in the sense that there's no, radio stations are playing songs. They're not playing album sides. I think it's Ramble On goes into.
Well, I think the fact that you just a minute ago brought up AOR, album-oriented rock as a programming paradigm for radio stations, and the way that like the 70s was big in that, and
it's Heartbreaker goes into Living Love Maid, by the way. Sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, it just was bothering me that I had.
But yeah, like. Well, I just remember, making tapes from vinyl and it being a colossal pain in the ass when I don't want the next song. I want just I pause the tape and then I take it out and I wind it back just a little bit so that when I start playing or recording the next song, I'm not going to get like 1 second of whatever tune was merged into it. But that also their intention is you're going to listen to this thing as an album, not as isolated individual songs.
But I guess what I'm referring to, though, I think those are the only 3 examples that I can actually think of off the top of my head. That I guess the only other example, they do it on purpose on the album, like you mentioned the Garage Days where Green Hell goes into
Green Hell
and
you
play those 2 songs together. Like to me, like you play Heartbreaker and Living Love and Maid, you don't only play one of them. You don't play just What You Need or Need You Tonight. You have to like it. it always bothered me when Need You Tonight was on the radio and then it didn't go into.
Yeah. Well, and the fact
Queen,
that
so Queen is like that. We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. Like, but I don't know when the album was put together. There was no intent. Like, is that a culture? I guess I'm trying to. What caused that? Like, why do
Well,
those?
I think it's a smart
Who
way.
started playing them together that now people just think of them together?
Well, on the album for sure.
I mean, I know they're sequential,
But they're not just sequential, right? Like it's mixed such that
I think
there's no
I think
gap. I don't think there's a gap. I think it
I think
fades.
I don't. I think one ends and then
Because I do remember, like, if you heard the one song, the other song was coming, and the radio stations did that sometimes.
There's a pause, like there's a beat before the next one starts. They match, like, but I don't think they bleed into each other, because otherwise, when the radio station does only play one of them,
they probably have the vinyl, the 45.
But I think on the album, I don't know if they bleed together. I know Heartbreaker and Live and Love Made don't bleed together. It ends. It goes Heartbreaker with a purple. Like there's a half a second pause.
Okay.
And they go together, but more often than not, those two are played together.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess it's a total tangent, but I don't know why that is. There's these couple. I can't.
Is it hard to crossfade it, right? Is it? Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of the actual, like, if you have two turntables and a crossfader, and you're in a DJ booth, like at a radio station, was it just too hard to get it right? So they just let it go? I wonder.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Well, because, another piece of that is, like, because of how they end on abrupt, like.
Yeah, I think it ends, and then the next one starts.
Because, that makes some sense, because so many songs, there's, like, the outro.
Yeah, but I don't think it's there. But I can't imagine that almost all songs in the world, there's an outro, and then because these songs mesh, I think there's some other dynamic of where it got into popular culture that those two, and then maybe like the NXS example may not be perfect because I don't know that people necessarily know that.
Well, but
I don't know. I feel like
music videos were one music video.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you saw the one music video, like it just became the other music video, and they were just a single unit. So they did that purposely. On purpose. Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Queen, put track 1 and track 2 on this album and we're like, oh, on the radio, they're always going to play both these songs. Like, I don't know and I don't even know what you call that. Like, is there a name for, I've taken us down a tangent, but let's see.
Well, they were both on the same single. Maybe they're both on the same side of the 45. I don't know. I wonder about that. Okay. So here we have.
So here I Googled why do they it says why
I Googled the same thing, and
they were meant to be a pair, an ideal way of whipping up Queen. So they played them live that way.
Rock You is a barely 2-minute pugnacious percussion heavy pseudo threat that features no traditional instruments save for looped hand claps and boot stomps until the solo shows up for the final 45 seconds. We Are the Champions is a soaring flowery ballad.
Yeah, this says it is 2 separate songs. They could be played separate from each other and together as well. It was a double A side, which meant the royalties go together and the radio would most likely play them together, but they are 2 different songs, one written by Brian May and one by Freddie Mercury.
I think that a double A side is important too.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is probably because We Will Rock You is so short. It's just not so you could fit it on one side of a 45.
Yeah, now the Heartbreaker and Live and Love and Made thing is not that. It's just that on the album they are super tight together and they flowed and radio stations started playing them together. But it's not like it wasn't a single or a double A side.
And that kind of makes sense too from that whole AOR, when Zeppelin was putting records out, that kind of thing. Yeah, because the only other time I can think of where you're going to hear back-to-back songs for most other bands, other than that NXS example and the Queen song here, and then what you said about the Zeppelin tunes, it's like Two for Tuesday on the hard rock station or whatever. But
they're always like picking two.
Yeah, they're cherry picking.
Yeah, this
hits and whatever. Yeah.
So on the Zeppelin thing, it just says like, they just record on the recording. They're kind of butt up against each other. Because it says, curiously enough, the band never performed the two songs back to back in concert, partly because Page hated Living Love and May. Like, he didn't like that song, so they wouldn't play. So it was definitely like all the reasons that the Queen one, like it's a complete opposite with this one. Like it wasn't a double A side. They don't play them together in concert. Like it was, well, that was a tangent for
but that's part of the reason I thought it might be good to talk about Queen is that there's all of this kind of stuff, they're not an uninteresting band. Like you can find all kinds of interesting things to talk about, just about how they did things. They never stopped being interesting throughout the entire career they had through Freddie Mercury's death. And I think it's interesting to me now that they're still doing stuff as Queen with Adam Lambert. I think it's smart that they did that. They didn't just say, Queen has a new singer now. They are like, he is performing with Queen. Queen is the three of us. He is, performing with us, but Queen is a separate entity from him. I think that's wise. I think that's smart. I think that was a good way to honor the fact that pretty much Queen was always those four dudes. That seems appropriate. But the fact that he can handle it, he can do that. He went from this reality show competition thing to fronting one of the most influential bands ever. Is crazy and kind of cool and interesting. But I'm not that interested in going to see Queen with Adam Lambert.
Right.
If Freddie Mercury was still alive, I'd go see Queen as soon as they came. Like it's a different thing. It's definitely a different thing. Okay, so you said you saw Bohemian Rhapsody a while ago.
It's probably 3 years ago. 4 years
So
ago.
It came out in 2018.
Might have been during COVID.
Yeah, it came out right before.
I didn't catch it right away, so it had been out for a while before I saw it.
The weirdest thing about watching it just this past weekend, so mid-February of 2024, was that it's not on any of the regular streamers as far as like Max or Paramount or Netflix, or I had to watch it on Tubi. And so it, of course, had commercials in it. And it was very weird that that's where I could find it. I could have paid for it on Amazon or whatever, but it wasn't like I have a Roku, so I put it in the search and it tells you all the places where you can get it. And everything was a paywall. And not just like a paywall, but a purchase the movie or rent it kind of. It was going to be $4 just for that movie, or $19, or whatever. Right. Yeah. Except for Tubi, which is like, that seems so odd to me because the movie just came out and it made. I mean, Rami Malek was a rising star, but that movie sort of like pushed him over the top as far as his star power, I think.
Yeah,
but. There's, the movie is not without its sort of issues, which is kind of appropriate, I guess. There's a article I found that is, all of the ways in which, let's see, it's on Radio X, and it's the biggest factual inaccuracies in the Bohemian Rhapsody film. And there's some pretty significant ones. Like they're a pretty big deal. Like the film makes it seem like Queen hasn't played together for years when they are going into Live Aid, and nope, they had just gotten off a tour like just the year before, and not that much longer before, and or not even the year before. Like Live Aid was summertime, wasn't it, or like early fall, something like that. Yeah. Well, they had toured together from August to May, 84 to 85. So, like, they had been on a tour for an album, and the album was a success. It was the works, and so that's a big deal. And like Freddie Mercury didn't know he had HIV before Live Aid, so it's not like he told the guys he was sick and then they went and played Live Aid. You know, he didn't know he had HIV for another like 2 or 3 years. 2 years. No, two years later is when he finds out he's got HIV. Rock in Rio happened in the 80s, not the 70s. Freddie didn't fire John Reed in the back of his limousine. You know, there's just all of these. His solo career didn't split up the band.
This reminded me of something that I remember. I think it was right before I saw the movie. There's a YouTube clip and a whole article about it's called Bohemian Rhapsody's terrible editing, a breakdown, or it's like basically like some of the worst film editing in any movie. I remember watching. I'm looking at this now, like, so it's calling out like, well, so the scene here is like the video essay analyzes what it claims is one of the worst edited scenes in Bohemian Rhapsody. Queen's first meeting with their eventual manager, John Reed. That scene lasts 104 seconds, but contains 60 cuts, which makes for an average shot length of 1.8 seconds. The shot lengths are 30% faster than what Michael Bay uses in most action scenes in the Transformers. I remember that scene, like if you watch the video, it actually breaks down, like the camera's all over the place. Like there's you're never like set. I didn't really notice it while watching it, but if you watch, I'll
have to check that out. John Reed's played by the actor who played Littlefinger on Game of Thrones,
which I have not watched yet.
Oh, Dean,
it's on our list of possibly when we retire to watch.
Just watch it all.
There's like 9,000 seasons, and it's apparently a lot.
It's not. You don't just watch like a couple of episodes and then come back to it a month later. It doesn't.
Well, and then from what I understand, the amount of paying attention, because there's 9,000 characters, and if you there'll be somebody who shows up in like 3 episodes in season 2, and then they're a major character in season 5, and if you don't know what's going on, it can be a little confusing. That's for sure. Oh, okay, cool. There's the link. Okay, so one of the other things about Bohemian Rhapsody that I think is important and complicated is, one, that it becomes this kind of monument or celebration or hero worshipy kind of movie about Freddie Mercury. The rest of the band is in the movie and are key players in how the movie plays out. But at the end of the day, it's a Freddie Mercury biopic. And that's significant because the treatment of Freddie Mercury is very romanticized at times. It's brutal in some places about, kind of the crappy way he treated the people important to him, but he has his redemption arc, and it comes back together, and Live Aid is set up as this monumental, hey, we've reconciled, and the band is back together again, and it's, mortality makes you understand what's important in your life, and family has this role, and family is a thing you can create for yourself. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, right? Yeah.
And then so that's not how people's lives really work. That's not, it's not a biography. It's a biopic. It's a dramatization.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Like
Yeah.
a documentary versus
Yeah.
a biopic.
Right.
Like, is
Right.
and
It's-
it doesn't. Well, and not lost in that is kind of what I was mentioning at up front. Like that was a band. You know, we've established like it's these four guys, and they were all in on the fact that they're a band, but also front-facing wise and to the public,
Right.
this was Freddie Mercury and some guys standing on stage with him. Like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because they didn't
like I
think of
said,
it that way. Like this,
it's three scruffy looking guys with long hair and Freddie Mercury.
if the movie had made Brian May's character as the focal point for the whole thing, it wouldn't be the same movie.
No, not
You can't
in the slightest.
you can't tell
yeah.
that story and just have these little side moments where there's this Freddie Mercury dude off to the side doing something, and you're like, you know,
Right. Well, and that's why titling it Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, is important. I mean, Brian May and the other guys in Queen disagree with the interpretation, but there are biographers of Freddie Mercury who are like, that's Freddie Mercury's coming out song. That's when Freddie Mercury is grappling with, I have this identity, and, you know, my family isn't going to, you know, deal with that the way that maybe I would like them to. So I'm going to bury it in all this art and operatic, you know, pomp and so then, with that being said, and with there being this sort of, what is your identity? Who are you? How do you create that? Even just the name of the band being Queen, and it's like, you know, is Freddie Mercury saying, you know, I am a queen? You know, how they're playing with all of the gender politics of the early 70s and everything else. Then you have the fact that Bryan Singer directed it. And Bryan Singer famously has directed the X-Men films and has clearly been interviewed saying that as a gay man, the X-Men films, you know, the metaphor of the mutant and identity and persecution, he worked his own struggles with identity and his own journey into the way he put those stories together. So for him, the X-Men films are these sort of coming of age and finding out I'm different than everybody else kind of narratives.
right.
So, okay, Freddie Mercury as a hero to a man in his, you know, situation and with his background and with his identity. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it tracks, right? But the fact that that is a man who was flawed and was, you know, addicted to substances and was abusive and treated his bandmates poorly and, you know, whatever, and then sought out redemption somehow and came back around, and the band got back together, and then it became sort of this martyr-like figure as AIDS, you know, strikes, you know, the rest of America, not just this one group that is getting no help from the government and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Bryan Singer's own scandals. And the fact that, like, he didn't really even finish Bohemian Rhapsody. Like, he wasn't showing up at times to do some of the filming, and somebody else had to kind of finish it up. And then, you know, he's been accused multiple times of inappropriate treatment of sometimes underage actors, and he's effectively, you know, moved to Israel and isn't making movies in Hollywood since Bohemian Rhapsody. And, you know, that there's all of these kind of things that I wonder if some of the messaging in how Singer framed the film is also like, you know, if there's a little bit of he's trying to find his own way to kind of be forgiven or be recognized for, hey, even though I'm flawed, I also did all this cool stuff too. I mean, I just don't know what's going on there, but it complicates the film in some pretty powerful ways. And I'm glad that people are like still checking out Queen music and that Freddie Mercury is being remembered for because he was an amazing artist and wrote a bunch of really great music. And Rami Malek is a good actor. I never could get past that, like, that's Rami Malek with like a bridge, you know?
Yeah.
like I never truly got there were a couple of spots where it's like, oh yeah, he is Freddie Mercury, but I don't know, it didn't quite get all the way there as far as the suspension of the disbelief or whatever. But yeah, I think Bryan Singer's baggage, you know, you can't really talk about that film without at least bringing up that guy is a problematic figure for a lot of reasons. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I saw it before. Actually, I don't even know that much about Bryan Singer, so like
he made Apt Pupil, the Stephen King movie, about a teenager whose next door neighbor, spoiler, ends up being a Nazi. And and when the film was made, there are a bunch of underage actors playing the high school kids, and like there's a shower scene where, you know, hey, this wasn't appropriately supervised, or perhaps people were naked who didn't need to be, and what was going on. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff that surrounds Singer and his filmmaking. And it's too bad because Singer is an excellent director, but it sounds like he might not be like a great person, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens a bunch.
Yeah. So, did you catch any of the concert after Freddie Mercury passed away in 92? There was the concert where all of those other singers sang Queen songs with Queen. They went back to Wembley Stadium and like sort of sold the place out.
That sounds familiar, but I'm going to say no.
I remember.
I don't remember.
I remember. So you weren't in Charlotte's Web yet, but Andrew and I were with Charlotte's Web, and we were practicing maybe at Good Times Pub. And it was on the TV there, and we were excited to see James Hetfield do Stone Cold Crazy with Queen. And so we saw that. That's the only part of it I remember seeing. I don't remember anybody else who performed at that show or anything, but I remember Hetfield. And it was weird seeing Hetfield without a guitar holding a microphone in his hand. I remember that like Hetfield was just standing there as a singer, not as like a guitarist and singer.
I feel like I saw that, but 92 parts of 92 are a blur. So
yeah. Well, and it was probably before you and I had even met, I would guess.
Yeah, close to around there. But
yeah, it would have been just before we met, probably. What's your favorite Queen song, Dean?
I don't know. That's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, from a nostalgia standpoint, again, like I instantly went to jazz as my first good, like kind of trying to just get myself in a Queen headspace. Actually, I forgot, this is not really answering your question, but since we're down a Queen wormhole, I forgot about the song. I don't know if you're even familiar with the song Mustafa, the opening track of Jazz.
No, In fact, I don't know that I've ever listened to that album as an album.
Yeah, I think because I had the cassette, or my brother had this, I don't know, but that song, the first, like, so it's all, I'm guessing, in Arabic or whatever.
It's in English, Arabic, Persian, and maybe some of the words are made up. Yeah. So some like understandable words are Mustafa, Ibrahim, Salam Alaikum.
I'll throw it on the the tail end of this or whatever. But it's so I put it on and I'm like, for a second, I probably hadn't heard the song in 20 years. And I'm like, there's something wrong with my headphones. And I was like kind of adjusting the volume. So the whole beginning of it is this like Arabic sort of that sort of theme. It's got a lot of those type of instrumentation, but it sounds real like kind of tinny.
Oh, okay.
Not over, just enough where you're like something's off, not like purposefully like drastic. And then the drums kick in and it kicks into this beat in the song and it's like fully produced. It's just like production wise, it's very interesting. And then it dips into these other little sing-songy kind of parts, and it's not my favorite song. I'm just saying, I was just like, that was a distraction from answering the what is my favorite song.
The weird part of that to me is like that was a single in '79. What a weird thing to make a single, you know?
Yeah.
That's one of those things about the '70s that is so weird to me, is like what somebody thought was going to sell a whole bunch of records, you know? Like that you could go to a jukebox and play that song because it's on a 45 record inside the jukebox. It just seems odd, and not as a B-side. That's the other thing too. Like, how weird. And apparently sometimes Freddie Mercury would sing parts of that song in Bohemian Rhapsody instead of some of the lyrics of Bohemian Rhapsody. Okay, here's another crazy thing, interesting to me, you know, that album Jazz, you know, comes out at the end of '78, and the connection between Fat Bottom Girls and Bicycle Race, that like those two songs are connected lyrically.
Yeah. Because
in Fat Bottom Girls, you know, at one point he says, "Get on your bikes and ride."
Yeah. Yeah, they're not sequential on the album.
No, Jealousy's in between there.
And I was going to say Bicycle Race is interesting to me. That was one that I listened to a lot back then. And it has a little moment of sort of meta when he's like, there's like a breakdown. And that was, again, the stereo part where it's like, you say black, I say white, you say black, and it's like back and forth. And then he calls out like, I don't like Star Wars, which is like had only been out for like, probably when they recorded it. And it's like,
like a year. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I always thought that one was interesting. I was just thinking too, we didn't even touch on it. So I brought up, you know, like Stone Cold Crazy and Metallica. And then you've also got Get Down, Make Love and Nine Inch Nails. Like,
yeah. And I had never heard.
I never heard the Queen one.
Yeah, I had never heard the Queen version
I went
until
and listened to it after.
Yeah. And because that cover is on the Sin single.
Sin, yeah.
And it was, you know, when we would go to Uptown, the dance club in Bowling Green, like that was a big deal. Because it was the first new Nine Inch Nails song in forever, even though it was a cover. Right. And like there just wasn't anything else other than Pretty Hate Machine forever. And then, you know, finally Broken comes out, but like it seemed to just take a long time to get more Nine Inch Nails stuff. And it was just such a big deal. And it's a great cover too. It's a pretty fantastic cover. And then the fact that, you know, he does that weird thing with like, sounds like the, you know, sort of fast forwarding the reel tape. And then it ends with the clappy, "We Will Rock You" bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was probably a few years after listening to that Nine Inch Nails song over and over that I finally heard the Queen version.
Yeah, a lot of those couple covers that Nine Inch Nails did, it took me a while to go and actually seek out the Adamant cover and
yeah
some of that. But yeah.
And apparently,
I think I successfully did not answer your question of what is my favorite song.
Yeah, that's okay though. Yeah.
Goal achieved.
So Brian May, this is great. In the Wikipedia thing, it says Brian May has said that the song was not an autobiographical portrait of Mercury and that Mercury did not particularly enjoy bicycling. Also noting that despite the lyric, "I don't like Star Wars," Mercury was a Star Wars fan. Man, that's so weird. Like, what? And that's from a Huffington Post article in 2015. Like, what? Yeah. So, I don't know that if we've shed any great light on Queen for anybody who's not already a Queen fan. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, all we did was interweave it with.
Yeah. We talked about
weird backgrounds are.
Yeah. We talked about stuff we liked. There's cool things. Okay. Let's think about that. So we've mentioned Nine Inch Nails covering "Get Down, Make Love." We mentioned Metallica covering Stone Cold Crazy. We have not at all mentioned Vanilla Ice until just this moment.
Oh, geez, yeah.
But there's a little extra beat in there.
It's maddening that was a.
Yeah. Who else has covered? Well, okay.
Queen.
Weird Al did another one, Rides the Bus.
Yeah.
But who else has done a Queen cover? I think it's pretty audacious to cover Queen, which is why people don't cover the big ones. I think, honestly.
Yeah.
Like somebody trying to cover Bohemian Rhapsody, sit down, shut up. That's just...
Unless you're so purposely not trying to really...
You would have to... I don't even know how you would do a cover of that unless you're trying to ape them. If you're trying to perfectly do a straight cover, like we are performing this, just other people are playing the exact same identical song. I don't know how you would cover Bohemian Rhapsody and make it a cover worth doing.
Yeah.
Because it's already so weird and so cross genre and so almost pastiche like in its range of stuff that's happening.
I just pulled up 25 times Queen was covered by other artists. I'm sure there's way more than those. So Metallica's the first one. Robert Plant, Innuendo. I don't know that I know the original or his one. Nine Inch Nails, Get Down, Make Love. Dream Theater did Tenement, Funster, Flick of the Wrist. Those must be off the first album.
Flick of the Wrist.
Bruce Dickinson, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Bruce Dickinson did? That's okay. I guess if there's somebody who's going to have
it as a duet with
a
Spanish opera singer named Montserrat Cabell.
Annie Lennox did Under Pressure, but was that with Bowie?
I think so. I think that might have been.
She kind of did the
Scorpions did.
Yeah, she did it with Bowie.
Green Day does We Are the Champions, but I'm guessing just live, maybe. I don't know. Testament, which is a metal band that I like a lot. They do a cover of Dragon Attack, which is a song I don't know. So I would have.
Yeah, Dragon Attack is, I think, on that Kind of Magic.
Yeah. Foo Fighters do Tie Your Mother Down.
Okay.
Corrosion of Conformity, Son and Daughter. I don't know.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Pucifer does Bohemian Rhapsody as well.
That would be interesting to hear. I want to know.
Yeah, I will send you this link. It's right here in this article. I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah, so that's a weird collection, but it's telling that the
Warrant.
majority of those.
Warrant did We Will Rock You. My Chemical Romance did Under Pressure.
Huh. That's interesting.
Melvins do You're My Best Friend. That might be good.
Yeah,
William Shatner does Bohemian Rhapsody.
That one makes sense too, of course.
The Flaming Lips do Bohemian Rhapsody. So actually, multiple people have done Bohemian Rhapsody on here. Electric Six does a cover of Radio Gaga. The Muppets doing Bohemian Rhapsody. So these are just like weird live things. These aren't really.
The Muppets doing
Disco
Bohemian
doing
Rhapsody.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, the Muppets doing Bohemian Rhapsody sounds like the most legitimate of any of the people you've mentioned actually doing it, other than maybe William Shatner, because it has to be Shatnerified, right?
Yeah.
That is, the only thing I can think of better would be William Shatner and the Muppets doing Bohemian Rhapsody together. That would be perfect. That would be amazing. But the fact that a lot of these tunes that are not Bohemian Rhapsody are lesser known Queen songs.
Yeah.
Lemmy and Ted Nugent. That's great. The Scorpions doing Love of My Life is interesting. That's fascinating. Warrant
I said
doing
Red
We
Hot
Will Rock
Chili
You
Peppers.
is a terrible idea. Oh, for Gladiator. Oh, no. Sorry. Different movie. Not the one with Russell Crowe, but the one with Cuba Gooding Jr. All right. Huh. That's crazy. Electric Six doing Radio Gaga actually kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah.
The Red Hot Chili Peppers doing Radio Gaga sounds...
So I said that
like,
too, but if you
weird.
read it more closely,
Red Hot Chili
it's the
Pipers.
Red Hot Chili Pipers.
Okay, that makes... Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, that's great. That's funny. So, I can't think of any, like, rock and roll bands that are like Queen.
Why
now.
did my mic
I
stop?
mean, I don't know how you would
Mhm.
recreate that. And some of it, I think, is like the way you described that they kept themselves current, that they were always trying different things, but like that so many genres would be on any given album. All right. So, well, thank you for joining us once again at Exit 181. We went down interesting couple of rabbit holes here about Queen. They are obviously a band that we're not going to see the likes of maybe in the rest of our lifetimes. They have been massively influential, and there's always something new to find. We were, coming across songs we hadn't even heard, and we both really like Queen. So there's a lot of stuff out there by them, and they're worth checking out. We really appreciate that you've been here with us for this very long ride tonight. And if you're interested in checking out more of our episodes, please go to Spotify and look for Exit 191 there. You can go to YouTube and find our YouTube channel. You can go to Facebook and look at our Facebook page. We also have a website at exit181.chaosspirals.com. That's CHAOSPIRALS.com. Thanks for being here, and we will see you again sometime real soon.